The word hit the room like a dropped tray. 52 people stopped chewing at once. He was on his feet before anyone could think. A man who owned half the skyline, pointing one finger at a woman in a stained white apron, telling her exactly what she was worth in front of every table. Nothing. She didn't cry. That's what nobody could explain afterward. Not the busboys. Not the line cooks. She stood there with the tray still flat against her hip, and she smiled. Small-closed, patient. The smile of somebody holding one card, face down, that beats the entire table. Then she leaned in. She said 6 words. Only he heard them. And the most powerful man in that city went white. He'd had her fired inside 40 seconds. He'd forgotten her face by the elevator. I had 11 weeks left before he found out what he'd just done. The word landed in the middle of the dining room like a dropped tray. You're nothing. Roland Beckhurst said it loud. He meant it loud. 52 people were eating dinner at the Larkspur Room that night, and every single one of them heard it. And for about 4 seconds, the only sound in that room was the ice maker running behind the bar. The woman he said it to was standing 3 feet from him, in a black dress and a white apron, and shoes that had been resoled twice. She did not cry. That's the part people would talk about later. The busboys, the line cooks, the couple at table 12 who'd come in for their 40th anniversary. Everybody expected the crying. It's what you expect. A man like that. A voice like that. A girl in an apron. She didn't cry. She smiled. Now, back up 6 months because none of this makes sense from the front. You have to come in the side door through the kitchen, the way she did every morning at 6. Her name was Etta Mullane. That's what it said on the schedule taped inside the walk-in. That's what the paycheck said, $11 and change after taxes. Direct deposit into a credit union account that had been opened 7 months earlier by a woman who had never in her life waited for a paycheck to clear. Except now she did. She watched it hit on Thursday nights like everybody else. The Larkspur Room sat on a corner in the old commission district of Merrow Bay, 4 floors of limestone brass door handles, worn soft in the middle from 60 years of hands. Inside it smelled like clarified butter and lemon oil and the cold metal smell of a walk-in door opening. Etta got there before the sun came over the buildings across the street. She unlocked the service entrance with a key that stuck. She flipped on the prep lights, and shoved it. That was the thing nobody had warned her about. She'd expected to hate it. She'd braced for it. 7 months earlier, she'd stood in a lawyer's office and been told what her father wanted from her. And she'd thought, fine, I'll survive it. I'll count the days like a prison sentence. I'll get through. But the kitchen at 6 in the morning had a hum to it. And Roscoe the sauté guy sang badly on purpose. And there was a rhythm to folding napkins, 40 of them, 60 of them. Your hands learning it until your brain could go somewhere else entirely. She had not expected to be happy in an apron, which was inconvenient, honestly, because she was supposed to be learning a lesson, and instead she was learning how to carry 3 plates on one arm. No, wrong. Ruth Ann Odell caught her wrist mid-air on her 4th day. You're gripping. You grip, you'll drop it by table 9. Ruth Ann was 66 years old, 30 years on that floor. She had gray hair pinned up in a style that had not changed since before Sloane was born, and forearms like a woman who'd carried a lot of weight a long way. She took the plates off Etta's arm one at a time and set them back down and started over. Here, flat. Let the bone do the work, not the muscle. The bone. Your forearm's a shelf. Use the shelf. Etta tried it. 3 plates. Steady. Huh. 30 years. Ruth Ann said. "I've got a few of those." She had a lot of those. Ruth Ann knew which table wobbled and which chair squeaked, and which regular's husband had died in March, and therefore should never be seated where they used to sit. She knew that Mr. Price got shaky hands after his second glass, and you brought his coffee early without being asked. She knew the ice maker made a different noise when the filter was going. And she said one thing in Etta's second week that Etta wrote down that night on the back of a receipt and kept. They were resetting a 6 top after a rough turn. Ruth Ann was squaring silverware without looking at it. "They won't remember your face," she said. "What? The guests. 90% you're a hand that brings things. They won't remember you tomorrow." She snapped a napkin flat. "So you remember them. That's the whole job. Somebody in this room has to be paying attention, and it isn't going to be them." Etta stood there holding a fistful of forks. Because she had a business degree from a school that costs more than a house, and she had run a foreign office of a company most people had never heard of, and she had sat in rooms where enormous decisions got made over sparkling water. And nobody in any of those rooms had ever put it that plainly. So she remembered them. Trina Kowal worked Tuesday through Saturday and had a 7-year-old named Otis and a cough she'd been carrying since February that she kept saying was nothing. She did the dinner shift here and a morning shift at a warehouse out past the rail yard, which meant she slept in blocks of 4 hours and had learned to be cheerful on top of it, which is a specific skill and a brutal one. She showed Etta a picture of Otis at least twice a week. Otis with a gap in his teeth. Otis holding a fish he did not catch. Otis in a puffer jacket 2 sizes too big because you buy big, that's how you do it. It has to last 2 winters. And Odessa Pratt came in every Tuesday at 10:40. 84 years old. Same table, the 2-top, by the second window. Same order. Black tea milk on the side, 1 shortbread, and she took 40 minutes with it, because 40 minutes was the point. "You're new," Odessa said the first time. "I am. You'll be gone by Christmas. They always are." She said it without any meanness at all. She said it like you'd say, "It looks like rain." "Milk on the side. Not in it. They pour it in and then it's tea-colored water, and I have to be polite about it." Milk on the side. "You'll forget." Etta did not forget. By week 6, Odessa's tea was on the table before Odessa got her coat off, and Odessa never said thank you for it. Not once. And Etta understood that this was itself a kind of thank you. You don't thank a thing that's simply reliable. You thank a favor. Odessa Pratt had stopped considering it a favor, which meant she'd started considering Etta part of the room. That was the promotion. Nobody gave her a plaque. So that's what the fall looked like. 6 in the morning. Napkins. Ruth Ann's shelf arm. Otis in a puffer coat. Milk on the side. And a woman living 2 lives so cleanly that she'd started to lose track of which one was the costume. Because here's what she was not telling anybody. Every night, after close, Etta Mullane walked 2 blocks east past the shuttered fabric wholesaler to where a black sedan sat with its engine off. And a man built like a bank vault opened the door without a word. And she got in. And the phone in the console was not the flip phone in her apron pocket. And when it came on screaming. Board flags, wire confirmations, 9 missed calls from a man named Edmund Rook, because the woman in the apron was Sloane Redfern, 28 years old, sole chair of Auden Holdings. Her father had died 9 months ago. Desmond Redfern, 68, dead in a chair in his study, with reading glasses still on his face and a glass of water going warm beside him. He'd built something enormous, and had spent 40 years making sure nobody knew his name while he did it. Ardennes didn't carry the family name. That was deliberate. That was the entire trick. Which is why nobody at the Larkspur Room ever looked twice at Etta Mullane. The will had a condition. 1 year. New name minimum wage inside the companies she'd just inherited. Get discovered or quit, and the trustees would convene to review whether she was fit to hold any of it. 7 months in, as of that fall. 6 of them here. But the will wasn't why she'd picked this restaurant. The last thing her father wrote, actual handwriting, blue ink, on a torn half-sheet, clipped to the back of a document nobody was ever supposed to read. Casually was 3 words. The Larkspur Room. No explanation. No sentence around it. Just the name of a restaurant that a hospitality group inside Ardennes had been running for years, and whose building her father had bought outright personally, 8 months before he died, at a price that made no sense to anyone who saw it. She had gone looking for why. 6 months in, she still hadn't found it. And she'd stopped looking as hard as she used to, because somewhere around month 3 she'd noticed she was staying for other reasons, which is a dangerous thing to notice about a life that's supposed to be temporary. Now. The night. It was a Friday in October, and the book was full, and the room was loud in the good way, and Harlan Pike was standing at the podium, doing the thing he did with his tie, which was touch it every few seconds, to confirm it was still there. Harlan was 47, and had been managing the room for 2 years, and he was not a bad man. That's important. He was a scared one. And there's a difference, though the difference gets thinner the longer you look at it. Etta had figured out the wine thing in September. It started as a nothing. A case of the marchand that came in and went out too fast. Then a decanting she'd done herself, a 2014, that she'd poured and tasted a thumbnail of on the line the way you do. And it was right. It was exactly right. And then 2 weeks later, she poured from what the book said was the same case, and it was thinner. Same label, different wine. So she'd looked. Not officially. She didn't have officially not as Etta. She just started keeping the invoices in her head, which she was good at because she'd spent 4 years being trained to hold numbers. And the numbers said Harlan Pike was buying a lower-tier bottling, relabeling the case count in the book, and pocketing the spread. Not enormous. 9, maybe 10,000 a quarter. Enough to make his margins look like a man who deserved to keep his job. She hadn't done anything about it yet, because doing something meant being someone, and she couldn't be someone for 5 more months. Table 7 was seated at 7:15. 3 men. And she knew the one in the middle before she got within 10 feet, because everybody knew that face it had been on the side of buses. Roland Beckhurst, 55. Beckhurst Group, a man who put up towers and put his name on them in a font you could read from the freeway. To his left, a younger man. 34, maybe. Good suit better watch the kind of smile that arrives before it's earned. Dane Whitlock, married to Beckhurst's daughter, which Etta knew from the seating notes, and from a society column she read the way other people read weather reports. She poured the marchand. Beckhurst tasted it, set it down, pushed the glass an inch toward her. This isn't the 14. He didn't look up when he said it. My apologies, sir. I poured it from the bottle you requested. Maybe the sommelier. He waved 2 fingers. Maybe the waitress shouldn't argue with me. That's a 16 at best. It's thin. Bring me the 09, and don't charge me for this one. And here is the thing that made her stomach turn over. He was right. Not about the label. The label said 14, but he was right about the wine, because it was thin, because Harlan Pike had swapped the case, and the only two people in that room who knew it were a billionaire being a jackass about it, and a waitress who couldn't say so. "Of course, sir. Right away." She brought the O9. He grunted, and then he settled in for an hour of the small stuff. He snapped his fingers. Twice, 3 times that dry crack that goes straight up your spine. He called her sweetheart. He sent the fillet back for being a degree past medium rare, while it sat there bleeding onto the plate in a way that said it wasn't. She kept her face still. She'd gotten good at that. At one point, he stepped away to take a call. He stood by the window with his back to the room, and Etta was clearing the table behind him, and she heard his voice change. "No, honey. No, that's fine." Pause. "It's not a big deal. I'll move it." Pause, and something softer than anything he'd said all night. Yeah, put him on." 20 seconds of a man talking to a small child. Genuinely talking. Asking about a school project. Then he hung up. And he turned around, and he was a knife again, and Etta stood there holding a stack of dirty plates, and thought, well, that's worse. Because a monster is easy. A monster you can file. But a man who can do that on the phone and then do this at the table, that's a man who knows exactly which people count. And he's decided. Dessert menus came at 9:40. Etta set them down, and Dane Whitlock leaned in as she did it close enough that she could smell his cologne, and his eyes did a slow trip from her shoes up. "You must have to smile a lot for tips, huh?" A grin. "What else do you do?" She had a response ready. She always had one ready. Something about the pear tart. She never got to it. Because Beckhurst laughed. Short, cold. The laugh of a man dismissing a check. "Leave it, Dane. You can't buy class." He picked up his water. "And you sure can't rent it from this one." And something in Sloane Redfern, which had been folded up small and quiet for 6 months, and had been sat on and stepped over and called sweetheart, snapped. She didn't retreat. She stopped. She set her hands behind her back and she stood up straight, and she looked Roland Beckhurst directly in the face for the first time all night. Her eyes were green. That was the first thing that registered on him, which was strange, because he'd been served by her for 2 hours and could not have told you a single thing about her face. "Is there a problem with the service, sir?" The voice was wrong. That's what he noticed second. Not the words. The voice. It didn't have the apology in it. He put the water down. "What did you say to me?" "I asked if there was a problem with the service." She let one beat go by. Her eyes moved to Dane and came back. "Or whether the problem is with your guests' manners." Dane's face went red in patches. Beckhurst pushed his chair back. The legs screamed on the floor. And he stood up, and he was a foot taller than her, and he was very, very calm, which is the worst thing a man like that can be. "I could buy this building and have it down by Tuesday." Quiet. Almost gentle. "I could have you fired so fast your head would spin. Do you have any idea who I am?" "Yes, sir. You're Mr. Beckhurst." "And what are you—" He pointed. Actually pointed one finger an inch from her collarbone. "You're a girl in an apron. You bring my food. You take my plates." And then loud enough for the coat check. Loud enough for the anniversary couple. Loud enough for a busboy who was 19 and would remember it for 30 years. "Here's your nothing." 52 people stopped chewing. Harlan Pike was already moving from the podium with no color left in his face. And Etta Mullane did not flinch, and did not cry, and did not look angry. And this is the part that got told and retold in that kitchen for years afterward. She smiled. Small, almost kind. It did not reach her eyes, and it did not need to. It was the smile of a woman holding one card face down that beats the entire table. She tilted her head, and she said it so quietly that only he heard it. "Then why do you work for me?" Beckhurst stared. His brain, that famous brain, that instrument, he'd been renting out at $900 an hour since he was 30, simply stopped. The sentence didn't parse. It was so absurd that it went right through his anger and came out the other side as pure confusion. "What?" He blinked. "What did you just say?" Harlan arrived, sputtering. "Mr. Beckhurst, sir, is there. I am so sorry. She's fired." Beckhurst didn't look at him. He couldn't stop looking at her. "Pike, she's fired. Get her out of here." Of course, sir. Etta. Office, now." She broke eye contact first, which he noticed, which he would think about at 4 in the morning for the next several nights, because she broke it the way you set down something you're finished with. She turned and walked toward the back of the room, with her spine perfectly straight, and she did not look at him again, and Roland Beckhurst stood alone at his table in a silent restaurant, with the strangest feeling he'd had in 30 years. He'd just lost something. He had no idea what. The office was a closet with a desk in it, filing cabinets, old coffee. Harlan was pacing, hand through what was left of his hair. "What were you thinking, Etta? What were you thinking that's Roland Beckhurst, that's not some tourist? He was inappropriate. His guest was harassing me. You're paid to do what the guest needs. I'm paid to bring food." She was sitting in the guest chair with her hands folded, very calm. "I'm not paid to be spoken to like that. I have to fire you." His voice cracked on it. "You know that. I don't have a choice. He demanded it. He could end this place. He could end me." And she looked at him. And for 1 second, Harlan Pike saw something in that woman's face that he could not account for and would never mention to anyone. Not anger. Something older and more tired than that. Something that had already run the numbers on him and come out somewhere sad. "Yes, Harlan, I understand." He sat down heavily. "You're the best server I have. 6 months never late. Never complains. Takes the tables nobody wants." He rubbed his eyes. "Why tonight? Why him? Everybody has a limit." She stood. She unpinned the apron, folded it in half and in half again, and set it on his desk, square to the edge. "Thank you for the opportunity." She was almost to the alley door when she stopped, because there was one more thing, and she couldn't say it, and she was going to say it anyway. "Harlan, the Marchand." He went very still. "Check the case numbers against the invoices from August," she said, "before somebody else does." And she walked out. The alley was warm and smelled like fryer oil and wet cardboard. She stood in it and took the first full breath she'd taken in 6 months. Behind her, the service door opened. Ruth Ann Odell came out with a coat over her arm. Etta's coat, the gray one, off the hook by the mop sink. She held it out. Etta took it. "He's a small man," Ruth Ann said. "He's about 6'3". "He's a small man." Neither of them laughed. It wasn't for laughing. Ruth Ann folded her arms and looked at her for a long moment longer than was comfortable, the way she looked at a table she was reading before it sat down. 30 years I've been in that room," she said. "You learn to tell who's passing through." She nodded at the coat. "You're not passing through. I don't know what you are, but you're not that." And then she went back inside, and the door shut, and Etta Mullane stood alone in an alley holding a coat. She walked 2 blocks east, past the shuttered fabric wholesaler, past the parking meter with the dent in it. The black sedan was where it always was, engine off, lights off, sitting in the dark like something patient. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door. "Evening, Ms. Redfern." "Evening, Hollis." She got in. Leather. Cool air. The door closed with a sound like a vault, and the last of Etta Mullane came off her like a coat she was done with, and what was left was so tired she could barely hold her head up. The car pulled into traffic. She reached into the console and took out the second phone, the encrypted one, and thumbed it on. It lit up like a switchboard. Board flags. A wire authorization from a subsidiary in a port city she'd never visited. An urgent from Edmund Rook, marked twice. And under all of it, one automated notification she'd set up herself 7 months ago to flag anything touching a certain hospitality group. Employment status change. Location 0114, the Larkspur Room. She looked at it for a long time. Because a woman named Etta Mullane had just been fired. And the person who signed off on her termination, the person who owned the building and the lease and the walk-in and the podium, Harlan Pike stood behind, and every plate in that kitchen was sitting in the back of a car, in the dark, holding a phone. She let her head fall back against the seat, and somewhere across town, on the 80th floor of a building with his own name on it, Roland Beckhurst was standing at a window. He could see the whole city from replaying 6 words he could not make sense of and telling himself it didn't matter. "I had a board meeting coming. End of quarter. Ardennes Holdings, the parent company, the silent one, and some chair he'd never met, flying in to sit across a table from him and sign off on the biggest project of his life. 5 blocks of a neighborhood called Corbin Row coming down to make room for something with his name on it. Whoever she was. He'd handled worse. She did not go home. She had a home. Technically. 41st floor glass on 3 sides, a view of the harbor that a magazine had once photographed for a feature she never read. Nobody had cooked in that kitchen in 9 months. There was a bowl of decorative stones on the counter that a decorator had put there, and that Sloane Redfern had never once touched. And every time she came back to that apartment, she looked at those stones and thought, who is that for? So she didn't go home. She had Hollis drive her to the storage unit off the rail yard instead. Unit 14C, $400 a month, paid from the account. Nobody watched. Because there was a box in there she'd been avoiding for 7 months. Her father's desk broken down. 2 chairs. 9 cartons of paper that the estate people had labeled MISC personal, which is the phrase institutions use for a man's entire interior life. She sat on the concrete floor under a fluorescent tube that buzzed and opened cartons. Now, here's what she was actually looking for. Not sentiment. She could get sentiment anywhere. She was looking for payroll. Because those 3 words had been driving her insane for 7 months, and she'd assumed for 6 of them that they were an instruction. Start here. Learn here. Except Ruth Ann had said something in the alley that rearranged everything. 30 years I've been in that room. 30 years. And Sloane had gotten into the car and thought that restaurant has been standing for 60. Somebody keeps records. Restaurants always keep records because restaurants get audited constantly, because that's the one industry the government does not trust. And her father had bought that building himself. So, carton 6, a rubber-banded folder soft with age, the corners gone furry. Inside it, photocopies. Somebody had gone to a records office and paid by the page. Employment registers. The Larkspur Room. Hand-typed carbon smudged. She went through them with her thumb. And she found him on the 4th page. Redfern D. dishwasher, $1. She sat there on the concrete with the buzzing tube overhead, and did the math 3 separate times, because the first 2 times she got a number she didn't believe. 53 years ago. He was 15, her father. Desmond Redfern, who died in a study with 1,000 books in it, who never once, in her hearing, said a word about where he came from. Who taught her to read a balance sheet at 9, and taught her to hold a fork properly at 4, and never taught her a single thing about himself. 15 years old. Buck 15 an hour. Standing at a sink in the back of a room she had spent 6 months carrying plates across, and she'd walked past that sink every morning at 6. That exact sink. They'd replaced the fixtures, but not the basin, because it was solid steel and there was no reason to. Her hands were not steady. She called Edmund Rook at 4 in the morning, and he picked up on the second ring because he always did, because he was 68 years old and had not slept properly since her father died. Sloane. He washed dishes there. A pause. Not a confused one. A careful one. "Ah," Edmund said, and she went very still, because "ah" is not what you say when you're hearing something for the first time. Edmund. Yes. How long have you known? 40 years. She stood up. She didn't decide to. Her body just did it. You let me spend 6 months. He instructed me not to tell you. Very quiet, very British, and very tired. That was the whole point, Sloane. He didn't want you to go there knowing. He wanted you to go there and then find out. In that order. A breath. Come to the office. I'll make tea, and you can be furious at me in a chair instead of a storage unit. How do you know I'm in a storage unit? Because I know you, he said, and hung up. The office was on the 9th floor of a building Ardennes didn't own, which was deliberate. Everything about Edmund Rook was deliberate. He was already dressed at 4:40 in the morning. Of course he was. She came in with the folder and put it on his desk and did not sit. Tell me all of it. So he did. Her father was 15 and had no people. That's the beginning of it. Whatever happened before 15? Edmund didn't know either, and had learned in 40 years not to ask. He got a job washing dishes at a restaurant on a corner in the Commission District. And he was good at it. And he was quiet. And he slept some nights in the dry storage room with the door propped, which the night porter knew about, and never reported. And there was a woman, Edmund said. What woman? He never gave me a name. He turned his cup a quarter turn on the saucer. A server, older than him. She fed him. That's how he put it. Not sentimental about it. He said there was a woman on the floor who made sure I ate, and I never paid her back, and by the time I could have, I couldn't find her. Sloane sat down, finally. He bought that building 8 months before he died. He did. For roughly 40% over market. He did. Edmund. She pressed her fingers against her eyes. Why didn't he just... He had 300 people who find people for a living. He could have found her in an afternoon. Edmund was quiet for a moment. I asked him that. And he said, Edmund, if I find her, I'll write her a check. He set the cup down. And he said a check would let me off. She didn't say anything to that, because she knew exactly what her father meant, and she hated that she knew. So he bought the room instead, Edmund said. The whole room. Every job in it. He couldn't find one woman, so he bought the floor she'd stood on and put it in the hands of the only person he trusted to understand what it was for. He didn't tell me what it was for. No. A small dry smile. He was not a generous teacher. He was an effective one. There is a difference, and it cost him a great deal, most of it with you. Now, the will. Everyone always wants the will part. So here it is, and it's shorter and meaner than people think. Desmond Redfern left her everything. All of it. Ardennes Holdings entire, which is a company most Americans have never heard of, and which owns things they touch every day. With one condition. 1 year. A different name. Minimum wage inside the companies. No security beyond a driver, no assistance, no cushion. Get through it, and the trustees release control absolutely. Get discovered before the year is out, or quit, and the trustees convene to determine fitness, which is not a coin flip. That's the thing people misunderstand about trustees. They're not a jury. They're 7 cautious professionals who are personally liable, and when a 28-year-old comes before them, having failed the one instruction her father left the safe vote is obvious, and the safe vote wins. She'd started 7 months ago. 6 months of it in that restaurant. 5 months to go. There's something else, Edmund said, and reached into a drawer. He put a single sheet in front of her. Blue ink. That handwriting. Not the half sheet she'd already seen. A second one sealed marked with a date. The date was the day she finished. You've had this the whole time? Yes. What does it say? I don't know. It's sealed. He looked at her over the top of his glasses. 5 months, Sloane. She looked at that envelope for a long, long moment. Then she pushed it back across the desk. Keep it! Which is the exact moment she decided she was going to finish. Not for the money. She'd never once thought about the money. And nobody ever believes that. For the envelope. By 9 was somebody else. Not Etta. Not the tired thing in the back of the car. She was the chair. She sat in a conference room she'd only used 4 times, and she said, "Bring me everything Ardennes holds that's under active development, and I want it by weight, not by summary." Because there was a thing bothering her. Beckhurst. 8 months ago, Ardennes had bought his debt. All of it in one silent transaction when his rivals had him by the throat over a bad play in a southern market. Ardennes hadn't taken him over. Ardennes had saved him and become his majority shareholder, and Roland Beckhurst had spent 8 months telling people his new owners were a bank with no opinions. She wanted to know what she owned of him. The file came up on a screen at 11:15. Halcyon Yard, 5 blocks, mixed use, 2 towers, retail podium, subterranean parking. And she read the first page and thought, fine, that's a project, that's what they do. And she got to page 4, which was the parcel map. Corbin Row. She knew the name. She knew the name because she'd heard it in a kitchen, because Trina Kowal had said it maybe 200 times over 6 months. Corbin Row. The bus is faster from Corbin Row. We got a new bodega. Corbin Row, Otis's school, is 4 blocks from the apartment. Sloane put her hand flat on the table. Pull the tenant schedule. Chair, the tenant schedule is 900 pages. Pull it. They pulled it, and she went through it herself alone for 4 hours, because she was not going to let an analyst do this, because she did not want anybody watching her face. Kowal T Unit 14C, Bellamy Block. 2 occupants. 2 occupants. Trina and Otis. A 7-year-old with an inhaler on his nightstand, and a coat bought 2 sizes big, so it lasts 2 winters. She kept going. Odell R., Unit 6A, Cheswick Terrace, 1 occupant. Tenancy commenced. She read the date twice. 19 years. Ruth Ann Odell had lived in that apartment for 19 years, which meant she'd moved in while her husband was still alive, which meant every wall in it had him on it somewhere. Sloane kept going. She didn't want to. She kept going. And on page 640, Par ATO Unit 2B, Cheswick Terrace, 1 occupant, tenancy commenced, 46 years. Odessa Pratt, 84 years old. Black tea milk on the side, 1 shortbread 40 minutes, same table, by the second window. Every Tuesday, since before Sloane Redfern was born. 46 years in 1 apartment. Relocation offer per schedule, $11,200. Sloane sat back in her chair in an empty conference room 70 floors above a city and put her hand over her mouth, because here's what she was actually thinking, and it wasn't noble, and it doesn't flatter her. She was thinking I poured that man's wine last night. Marchand decanted 40 minutes to breathe. She had carried it to him on a tray she'd polished herself, and she had stood there while he told her it was thin, and he was celebrating. That's what that dinner was. That's why Dane Whitlock was smirking, and why there were 3 of them, and why the check came to $1,100. They were celebrating. And the thing they were celebrating was going to put Odessa Pratt on a bus with a suitcase. He didn't see me, Sloane thought. And then worse, he doesn't see her either. And then worst, the one that actually got her, the one that came up from underneath like cold water. Neither did I. Because how long had she been walking past Odessa Pratt with a teapot? 6 months. And she'd never once asked that woman where she lived. Not once. She'd learned the milk. She'd learned the shortbread. She had congratulated herself privately on learning the milk. She'd been so proud of herself for remembering the tea. So she stopped being proud of herself, and she started working. The next 3 weeks, she learned things. Not corporate things. She already had corporate things. She'd been raised on corporate things the way other children are raised on cereal. She learned tenant law. She sat with a legal aid attorney named Persis Vaughn, 6'2", 29 years in housing court. An office with a window that didn't open, and she said, "I'm a consultant. I need to understand relocation." And Persis said, "Sure, honey. Everybody's a consultant." And then Persis taught her the gap, which is the simplest and cruelest arithmetic there is. The relocation offer gets calculated against the rent you currently pay, which for a woman who's been in a stabilized unit for 46 years is almost nothing, which means the offer is almost nothing. And the rent you're being relocated into is the rent today. So the longer you've stayed, the less you get, Sloane said. Now she's got it. That's backwards. That's how it's written most places. Persis didn't even look up. Loyalty's a liability. 46 years in a building means you've paid for that building 4 times over, and you'll walk out with less than a kid who moved in last spring. It's not a loophole. It's the design. And she learned about community land trusts, which she had heard of the way you've heard of the pancreas. Persis drew it on a napkin. The residents collectively own the ground. A nonprofit holds the land in trust permanently. Buildings can be developed, renovated, even built new, but the ground underneath can never be flipped, and the resale is capped by formula forever. So a developer can still build. A developer can absolutely still build, Persis said. They just can't build on top of people. They have to build with them at the table. Turns out that's the part they hate. Sloane wrote the words down in a notebook she'd bought at a bodega on Corbin Row. And then she sat in the dark in an apartment with decorative stones in it, and thought about walking into a room as herself. God, she wanted that. She wanted it so badly, she ran the scene 4 or 5 times. Kill Halcyon Yards with a phone call. Fire Roland Beckhurst before lunch. Watch his face do what her face had been doing for 6 months. Except if she did that, she was discovered. Condition broken. Trustees convene, and she was not entirely sure, sitting there, what she'd be giving up, if that happened only that something in her chest went cold when she got near the edge of it, and she didn't want to look at the shape of it yet. So she picked up the phone and called Edmund at 11 at night. "I need to do this without being in the room." A pause. "That is considerably harder." "I know. You'll be fighting a man with your hands tied and your name off the door." He sounded almost amused. "You'll be a rumor from an office. Meanwhile, he'll be in front of the board with a laser pointer and a very good suit. Then I need somebody who can be in the room." "Who?" And Sloane Redfern looked at her own reflection in 41 floors of glass, holding a bodega notebook with the words Community Land Trust written in it, in handwriting that looked exactly like her father's. "People who live there," she said. "Freeze the demolition budget," she told him. "Not the project. The demolition line only pending audit chair's authority, effective immediately." Because she wanted him angry. Because an angry man moves fast, and a man moving fast leaves a trail. And somewhere in 900 pages, there was a number that was going to be wrong. She could feel it. She just hadn't found it yet. And she wasn't going to find it in a conference room, and she wasn't going to find it in an audit, and no analyst on the 9th floor was ever going to find it either. 2 days later, a woman named Etta Mullane knocked on a door in Corbin Row with a bag of groceries she claimed were on sale, and Trina Kowal opened it and burst into tears before either of them said a word. Trina cried for about 90 seconds and then apologized for it for about 4 minutes, which is a ratio that tells you everything about her. I'm sorry this is stupid. You're the one who got fired. Trina. And I'm standing here bawling in my own doorway like a lunatic. Trina, let me put the milk down." She let her put the milk down. The apartment was small, and it was immaculate, which is a specific kind of immaculate you only see in homes where somebody has decided that if they can't control anything else, they will control this. 14th floor, Bellamy Block. A pull-out couch in the living room with a boy asleep on it, and an inhaler on the side table, and a coat on the hook by the door that was 2 sizes too big. Otis was 7, and had a fever, and had been sleeping since 4. "It's just a cold," Trina whispered, filling a kettle. "It's just he gets it every fall. It sits on his chest." "How long?" "A week." A pause. 9 days. Sloane looked at the inhaler and did not say anything about 9 days. They sat at a table barely big enough for 2 plates, and Trina turned her mug around and finally said the thing she'd been not saying since she opened the door. "We got the notices." "When?" "August." She laughed, one note no humor in it at all. "They put them under the doors. Not certified mail, nothing, just under the door, like a pizza flyer." She came back with a folded page, soft at the creases from being unfolded 100 times. "Beckhurst Group, notice of planned redevelopment, Halcyon Yards." Sloane read it with her heart going hard, because she had approved the wording on that letterhead template 11 months ago, in a batch of 40 documents she had skimmed. "They offered a buyout," Trina said. 11-2. "For the unit. For the whole thing. For 8 years. For the deposit and the moving truck and first last, and security somewhere else." She sat back down. "Do you know what first last and security is out here now?" "Yes." "It's more than 11-2. "Yes." "So," Trina spread her hands, "so that's the joke." She was quiet for a second. Then softer, and this is the part Sloane would think about at 3 in the morning for weeks afterward. "People like him. They don't hate us, Etta. That's what I keep trying to explain to my mother. He doesn't hate me. He'd have to know I exist, to hate me. Now, here's where Sloane Redfern started lying to people she loved, and she knew she was doing it, and she did it anyway, and it is going to cost her something before this is finished. I got temp work, she said. Filing. Law office up on 9th. Good for you. And I hear things. She turned her mug. There's a parent company over Beckhurst. Ardennes. Trina blinked. The bank people. They're not a bank. Everybody says they're a bank. They're not. Sloane kept her voice level. They own him. Majority. And there's a chair some woman she froze the demolition money. As of Tuesday. Trina stared at her. Froze it. Pending audit. Etta. She leaned in. Etta, does that mean? It means somebody up there is looking for a reason. And Sloane watched hope come into that woman's face. And she had put it there with a sentence. And she had never in her life felt more like a fraud than she did in that kitchen at 9 at night. Because she was the somebody up there. And she couldn't say it. So she sat there and let her friend believe in a stranger. The community meeting was on a Thursday in the basement of a church on Corbin and Vance. Folding chairs. 90 of them, about 60 filled, which the woman running it said was the best turnout yet, which told you what the other turnouts had been. Sloane sat in the back row in a wool hat. She'd like to say she was being tactical. She was hiding. And it was terrible. Not the crowd. The content. A man in a windbreaker got up and read questions off an index card he'd clearly rewritten 4 times, and the questions were good. They were the right questions, and there was nobody in that room who could answer any of them. Where does the dust go? Who pays for the school buses if the school closes? What happens to a lease when the building's gone? 60 people in a basement asking the right questions into an empty room, and Sloane sat there with the answers in her pocket and her mouth shut. Ruth Ann Odell stood up not. She didn't have an index card. I'm not going to argue about the money, she said. Everybody's arguing about the money, and it's a waste of your evening because they've got more of it, and they'll win that one. She let that sit. So I'll just say the names. And she started saying names. 61 of them. She'd counted. Every person she could remember who'd lived in Cheswick Terrace in 19 years, and what unit, and what happened to them. Mrs. Aldana, in 3C, who taught piano and never charged the kids who couldn't pay. The Boyles who lost a son and moved south. Dennis on the 4th floor who shoveled the whole block for 11 winters and then had a stroke, and nobody shoveled for him. 61 names in a church basement. It took 4 minutes, and it was the most devastating thing Sloane Redfern had ever sat through, and she'd sat through her father's funeral. Because what Ruth Ann was doing was so simple. She was making them expensive. You can move a tenant for 11.2. You cannot move Mrs. Aldana in 3C, who taught piano, and never charged the kids who couldn't pay, because now she has a face, and once a thing has a face, somebody has to look at it. Afterward in the hallway, with the bad linoleum, Ruth Ann found her by the coffee urn. You came. I live here now, Sloane said. Which was almost true. She'd taken a room on Corbin 6 days after she got fired, $400 a month, a hot plate, and a window that faced a wall. Sublet. Since the restaurant. Ruth Ann looked at her over the top of a styrofoam cup, that look again. The one from the alley. Sure, she said, and didn't push. And that was somehow worse than pushing. Now the numbers. Because while Etta was sitting in a church basement, the chair of Ardennes Holdings was going quietly out of her mind on the 70th floor of a building across town. The audit came back on the frozen demolition line, and the audit said clean, which was wrong. She knew it was wrong, the way you know a note is flat. 22 months of Halcyon Yard's paperwork and every single page balanced, and the demolition and site prep line came to $218 million, and it balanced against a bid from Halvern Constructors, and the bid was signed and dated and countersigned, and it balanced. Nothing balances. That's the thing about real construction. Nothing ever balances. There's always a change order, always a soil surprise, always a week of rain. When a construction file is perfectly clean, it means somebody built it clean, which means somebody built it after the fact, which means you are not looking at a record. You are looking at a story. But she couldn't prove a story from inside the system, because whoever wrote the story had access to the system. She spent 9 days on it and got nowhere. And on the 9th night, she was sitting on the floor of a $400 room reading a photocopy of a bid document, so tired she was reading the signature block for the 4th time without seeing it. Halvern Constructors. Executed by, and then underneath in that little line nobody reads, Field Superintendent of Record. And Sloane sat up so fast she hit her head on the windowsill. Because a superintendent of record gets a copy. That's the whole thing. That's the entire crack in it. The company keeps the master. The client keeps a copy. The system keeps a version. All 3 of those live in a world somebody with access can edit. But the field super, the man in the boots who has to make the pour on Tuesday, he gets a paper set. And he takes it home in a truck. And it goes in a drawer or a garage or a box because that's what those men do. Because if it ever goes to court, it's his neck and every one of them knows it. Halvern had been building in Marrow Bay for 40 years. Ruth Ann Odell's husband dead 3 years, had worked construction his entire life. She had never once asked what company. Which is exactly the thing she'd promised herself she would stop doing. She was on Cheswick Terrace at 7 the next morning with 2 coffees. Ruth Ann opened the door in a bathrobe and did not seem surprised, which again was starting to be a pattern. The apartment was 19 years deep. That's the only way to describe it. A wall of photographs going back to a wedding where everybody's collars were enormous. A recliner with a shape in it. A man's flannel shirt still hanging on the back of the bedroom door, and neither of them mentioned it. Your husband, Sloane said. Vernon. What did he do? Ruth Ann's cup stopped halfway. Why? And here it was. The moment. She could lie. She'd gotten very good at lying, disgustingly good. She'd been doing it for 7 months. And it came out smooth as cream now, and that was its own kind of horror. Because I need to know if he kept paper, Sloane said. Ruth Ann set the cup down. Sit down, Etta. Ruth Ann, sit down. She sat, and Ruth Ann Odell looked at her for a long, long moment, and then went into the bedroom, and came back with a step stool. Top of the hall closet, she said. I can't reach it any more, and I won't ask my nephew because then he'll ask me why I'm keeping it. It was a cookie tin. Faded picture of a harbor on the lid, dented on one corner, taped shut with masking tape gone the color of weak tea. I was a super for Halvern, Ruth Ann said. 31 years. He kept everything. Drove me crazy. I said, Vernon, we've got a garage full of paper, and he said, Ruthie, the day something falls down, they're going to come looking for the man who signed for the concrete. Sloane's hands were shaking again. Twice in 1 month. Some record. Did he ever work on Corbin Row? He priced it. Ruth Ann frowned, reaching for it. 4 years ago, maybe. After he retired, they'd still call him in, because nobody could estimate a demolition like Vernon. Somebody was looking at those 5 blocks before your Mr. Beckhurst ever put his name near them. Vernon did the walkthrough and wrote the number and came home and said they're going to want to do it in a hurry. Ruthie, and you can't do that block in a hurry. Sloane got the tape off with her thumbnail. Inside folded blueprints, gone soft. A tin of loose screws, because of course. 3 field notebooks. A photograph of a job site with 9 men squinting into the sun. And a manila envelope. Halvern Constructors, Demolition and Site Prep. Corbin Row Parcels 1-5, Pricing Basis. She opened it. She read the summary page, and the number at the bottom was $155 million. She read it again. She read it a third time out loud, in a whisper, like a woman checking a lottery ticket. Because the file on the 70th floor said 218. Same scope, same 5 parcels. Halvern had carried Vernon's basis forward into their bid, the way estimators do adjusted for 4 years of escalation, and the escalation did not account for $63 million. $63 million that had been approved by a board wired somewhere and papered over so cleanly that a forensic audit had come back and said the word clean. Etta. Sloane looked up, and she must have had a face on because Ruth Ann Odell had gone very still in her recliner in her bathrobe at 7 in the morning. What is that? It's the number. What number? The real one. And Ruth Ann Odell, 66 years old, 30 years on a restaurant floor. 19 years in that apartment, 3 years a widow, looked at the tin box on her coffee table. And she said Vernon. Just that. Just his name. He'd walked in the door. Then she took her glasses off and pressed the heel of her hand against her eyes and said, That son of a gun. That son of a gun kept it. Here's what nobody in that apartment knew. 3 weeks earlier, a junior associate in Edmund Rook's office, 26 ambitious, $400,000 in debt, from a law degree had been offered $90,000. Not for documents, not for files, for 2 things, the chair's calendar, and 1 clause out of a private trust instrument. He'd said no the first time. That's worth saying. He said no. And then the man who asked him, polished 34 married, well said the only sentence that works on a person like that. It's not information. It's scheduling. So by the middle of October, Dane Whitlock knew that the chair of Ardennes Holdings was a woman who had spent 7 months working somewhere under another name, and that there was a line in her father's will that turned her into nobody the day it came out. He didn't need to beat her. He just needed her to say her own name in front of enough strangers. Beckhurst came to the community meeting on the 14th. He came in like weather. 2 black cars, a woman with a clipboard, and a videographer with a shoulder rig, and Sloane sat in the back row in her wool hat and felt her stomach turn over. Because she understood immediately. This wasn't negotiation. This was footage. He'd brought checks, not a fund, not a program. Physical checks, $3,000 each hardship assistance, and a stack of forms to sign to receive them. Sloane knew what was on page 2 of those forms before she saw them. Waiver of standing. Sign here for $3,000 and you agree not to be a party to any future action regarding this parcel. And people started getting up. That's the part that hurt. Because you sit in your seat and you think nobody's going to take that. And then a man with 2 kids gets up because $3,000 is $3,000 and it is November. Odessa Pratt got up too. But she didn't get in the line. 84 years old. She got up out of a folding chair with both hands on the seat in front of her, and she walked to the middle of the floor, and she stood there in a coat with a brooch on it. I've lived at Cheswick Terrace, she said, for 46 years. Her voice was thin. The room went quiet for it anyway. My husband died in that apartment, in the front room. April of, ma'am. Dane Whitlock, smiling, moving in with a hand half-raised gentle as a man herding a goose. Ma'am, we're going to have a comment period at the, I'm making a comment, at the end, and we've got a lot of folks here waiting on their assistance checks. I am 84 years old, Odessa said, and I have waited my whole turn. Ma'am. And he put his hand on her elbow. That's all he did. He put his hand on her elbow to steer her the way you'd move a chair. And Odessa, a Pratt, stopped talking. Not because she chose to. She stopped because a stranger touched her arm in a room full of her neighbors, and something went out of her. And she looked down at the floor. And in the back row, a woman in a wool hat stood up. Every reason not to was screaming, because there were cameras. Because Dane Whitlock had eaten dinner 9 feet from her face. Because there were 4 months and change left, and if one man in this basement recognized her, 7 trustees convened, and Corbin Row went flat, and every person in this room lost their home because she couldn't sit still. Because sitting still was the whole job. Sitting still was the entire assignment. She stood up anyway. Take your hand off her. The room turned. Dane's hand came off Odessa's elbow like the woman was hot. Excuse me. She had the floor. Sloane walked up the center aisle. Slowly. Hands empty, hat on heart, going like a hammer. You interrupted an 84-year-old woman to hand out checks, and you touched her. And there's a camera running, so let's all be really sure about what we want on tape. The videographer, God bless him, kept rolling. Beckhurst turned around. And here's the thing about Roland Beckhurst. He looked right at her. Full face, 12 feet fluorescent light. And nothing happened. Because in his mind, he'd never met a woman. He'd met an apron, and the apron wasn't here. And you are, I live here. Everyone here lives here. Amused. Turning back. That's rather the point of the page 2. He stopped. What? Page 2 of your assistance form. She said it to the room, not to him. It's a waiver of standing. You sign that you take $3,000 and you agree you're not a party to anything that happens to this block for the rest of your life. She turned to the man with 2 kids who was holding a pen. Sir, read page 2, that's all. Just read it before you sign it. The man read page 2, and then he put the pen down on the table very carefully, the way you put down something that turned out to be sharp. And so did the woman behind him. Sloane got Odessa into a chair. Her hands were cold. Somebody brought her a coffee she didn't drink. Beckhurst left inside 4 minutes. The cars pulled out. But Dane Whitlock stopped in the doorway of that church basement, and he turned around and looked back across 90 folding chairs at a woman in a wool hat helping an old lady into a seat. And he stood there a half-second too long, because he'd heard that voice before. He knew he had. He couldn't place it yet, and it was going to bother him all the way home. And at 11 o'clock that night, he was going to sit up in bed in the dark and say out loud to nobody the restaurant. And then he was going to pick up his phone at 3 minutes past midnight and send a note to a scheduling coordinator at Beckhurst Group. Full media capture at the Ardennes Quarterly. Bring the shooter, and find out who else we're allowed to bring in the room. Roland Beckhurst did not sleep the night before. He would have told you that was normal. He'd have told you sleep was a tax on the ambitious, and he'd have said it with that little half-smile, and it was mostly true. Except this was different. Because at 2 in the morning, he was standing in his kitchen in a robe drinking water he didn't want, and the thing running in his head was not the presentation. It was 6 words. Then why do you work for me? Which meant nothing. Which was the babble of a girl who'd cracked. He'd had her fired inside 40 seconds, and by any measure he had won that exchange comprehensively. So why was he awake? He put the glass down. Because a man does not lie awake over a victory. The elevator popped his ears. He hated that. 90 floors in about 40 seconds, and he had to work his jaw like a tourist, and this was the exact reason he'd capped his own tower at 80. Slower cars, gentler ride. He'd fought the engineers for it. Ardennes had built theirs faster on purpose. The doors opened directly into the boardroom. No reception, no lobby, no moment to fix your tie. He'd never seen that before in his life. And the room. The room was a weapon. He clocked it in 2 seconds because he'd designed rooms like it and never quite this well. 100 feet long. One table black, polished to a mirror, so the whole thing read as a hole in the middle of the floor. Chairs set far apart, which does something to a delegation. It pulls them into individuals. And the west wall was glass. All of it. One enormous, unbroken sheet. And out there, small sitting down among the midtown giants, was Beckhurst Tower. His name on it. 4-foot letters. From here they were the size of a thumbnail. That's deliberate, he thought. Somebody sat in this room and chose this angle, which he respected, and which made him want to break something. He'd come in with a war counsel. Peter's general counsel, a man whose face lived in a permanent state of anticipating bad news. Stevens, the CFO, sweating through a shirt at 9:45 in the morning and clutching a leather binder like a flotation device. 2 analysts with cases. A videographer Dane had added to the manifest, and 2 seats on the guest list Dane had spent a week arguing for. And Dane, who had been strange all week. Twitchy. Asking twice whether Roland had ever actually met the chair. 7 people were already seated. He recognized none of them and disliked all of them instantly, on principle, on sight. They weren't the men he'd come up against. No cigars, no scar tissue. A woman in her 40s, with a severe haircut, working a transparent screen. A man in his 30s in a hooded sweatshirt under an expensive blazer. An older man who nodded once and went back to his notes. Accountants, Beckhurst thought. A committee of accountants, and a girl with an inheritance. At the head, beside a single empty chair, sat Edmund Rook, sipping water, not standing up. "Mr. Beckhurst, you're early." "I'm prepared." He took the seat directly opposite the empty one, so the whole black length of the table ran between them like a field. "The chair is finishing her review." "I'm sure she is." He snapped his case open. "While Her Highness completes her homework, we can begin. My team has revised the— We'll wait." Rook didn't raise his voice. That was the maddening thing. He never raised it. "She's very punctual. She wouldn't want you to have to start over. It would be inefficient." Inefficient. A man who bills by the hour, lecturing him about efficiency. Beckhurst put both hands on the arms of his chair and made himself breathe. And he was building the first sentence of his counterattack when a soft tone sounded from the console in front of Rook. Rook glanced down. "Ah, she's on her way up." A beat. She notes she's bringing a guest for the minutes. A Miss Trina Kowal, representing the Corbin Row Residents Association. Beckhurst was on his feet before he decided to be. Absolutely not. Nobody moved. "This is a closed meeting. Shareholders and officers. You do not walk an activist into—" "The chair," Rook said, "holds control of Ardennes. Ardennes holds control of your company." He turned a page. "She may bring whomever she likes, as apparently may you. Please sit down. She may bring whomever she likes. The absolute unembarrassed size of it." He sat down, and his brain went sideways fast the way it always did in a crisis, because he had prepared for 11 hours to fight a financier, and now he was going to be made to fight a victim on camera. He leaned to his left. "Get the crime figures up, and the blight photographs. Now." Dane didn't answer. Beckhurst looked at him. Dane Whitlock had no color in his face. Not nervous. Emptied out. I was watching the far doors, and his jaw was doing something, and there was sweat along his hairline in an air-conditioned room. "Dane." "Yeah." "What's the matter with you?" "Nothing." The doors opened. They were enormous, and they moved on some pneumatic thing that made them sigh, and two figures came through, backlit from the corridor. The first one stepped into the light, and Beckhurst almost laughed, because she was tiny. A thin woman in a department store suit, pressed so many times it had gone shiny at the elbows, holding a plain manila folder against her chest like a shield, her face white, and her eyes enormous. This was the ambush. This was what he'd been kept awake by. He felt a wash of relief, so physical it was almost pleasure. He would eat this woman alive, and be gentle while he did it, and it would look like grace. He barely glanced at the second figure. Some junior lawyer. A handler sent to hold the activist's hand. He was already writing his opening line. "Ma'am, I understand the emotion here, but progress." And then the board stood up. All 7 of them. At once without a signal, the way people stand in a courtroom. Beckhurst blinked, because they weren't standing for the little woman with the folder. She was still 6 feet behind. So he turned his head, and he actually looked at the second one. She was tall. She was walking slowly. Not hurrying, not performing, just walking, and her heels made almost no sound on that floor, and she wore a navy suit so plainly cut that it took him a full second to register what it must have cost. She went past the board, past her own guest. She didn't stop. She kept walking all the way to the head of that black table, all the way to the empty chair. And Edmund Rook, who had not stood for Roland Beckhurst, rose and pulled it out for her. She turned to face the room, and the window light came across her, and Roland Beckhurst's world came apart. It was not shock. Shock is a feeling, and this had no feeling in it at all. It was a machine failing. 2 images loading into the same slot, and neither one giving way. A girl in a black apron. Hair scraped back. Cheap shoes. Something you point at. And this. Same face. Same green eyes. Same everything and nothing. Because the face was in the wrong frame, and the frame was the size of a building. Dark hair down. Hands on the table. One thin watch. And the eyes came down the whole length of that black table, past his lawyer, past his CFO, and landed on him with the weight of a wall. He heard himself make a sound. Etta. It came out cracked. It came out as a question. He had said that name to a waitress, and she smiled. That smile. The one from the restaurant. The one he'd been turning over at 2 a.m. for 11 weeks. She tilted the smallest correction. "It's Ms. Redfern, actually." Then to the room in a completely ordinary voice. "Good morning, everyone. Please sit." They sat. He didn't. He couldn't remember how. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Beckhurst." She pulled her chair in. "I've been looking forward to this." Peters got it first. Beckhurst watched his own general counsel look at the little brass plate on the table, S. Redfern chair, and lose every bit of color he had. "No," Beckhurst said. His voice didn't work right. "No, you were a waitress. I had you fired." "You had Etta Mulin fired," she said. "That's correct." She was a server, and her employment was terminated at your request. She said it like correcting a date in a footnote. I'm Sloan Redfern. I chair Ardennes Holdings. Ardennes is the majority holder of Beckhurst Group. A pause exactly 1 beat long. I sign the checks that pay your salary, Mr. Beckhurst. You'll be addressing me today. She gestured at his case. You have the floor. You came to defend Halcyon Yards. Please, tell us how you're saving Corbin Rowe. His hands would not open the latches. That was the humiliating part. Not the words. His hands. He'd shaken a president's hand with these hands, and they would not work, 2 brass catches, and Peters reached over to help, and Peters was shaking too. Allow me, she said. Not an offer. She touched the console, and the screen at the end of the room came alive, and it was not his deck. It was a photograph of a sleeping boy, 7 years old, gap in his teeth, asleep on a pull-out couch with a blanket pushed down around his waist, and on the side table beside him, in focus an inhaler. This is Otis Kowal, she said. He's 7. His mother gave me this photograph and asked me to use it. He lives on the 14th floor of Bellamy Block, which you have scheduled for implosion in March. Trina Kowal, standing at the far end of the room in a shiny elbowed suit, looked at her son on a screen the size of a garage door and put her hand over her mouth. Your environmental filing, Sloan said, which you signed, describes the resulting particulate event as acceptable and temporary. Click. A letterhead from a clinic on Corbin. This is from a physician who has practiced in that neighborhood for 22 years. She has 91 pediatric asthma patients within 4 blocks of the demolition footprint. She writes that in her clinical experience, uncontrolled demolition dust from a project this size will put an unacceptable number of those children into emergency care, and that she has watched it happen before on that same block. Sloan looked up. She wasn't consulted. She's 400 feet from the fence line and nobody called her. Click. An old woman in a coat, with a brooch on it, sitting in a folding chair in a church basement looking at the floor. Odessa Pratt, 84. Cheswick Terrace Unit 2B, 46 years. Beat. Her husband died in that front room. Click. A single line item. Your relocation offer to Ms. Pratt is $11,200. The number sat up there in white on black. The cost to rehouse an 84-year-old woman in the same district at current market is not less than $71,000. She let it hang. Your filing categorizes her as successful tenant relocation. There's a checkbox. This is... Beckhurst found his voice, and it came out as a bark. This is anecdote. He stood. The chair went back. This is sentiment. We're not social workers. You cannot build anything in this country without your right. She said it so easily that it stopped him mid-sentence. We're not social workers. Her voice dropped, and it got quieter, and quiet was worse. So let's talk about business instead. Let's talk about fraud. Click. 2 columns. On the left is the demolition and site prep line you submitted to this board. $218 million. Click. A scan. Folded creases visible. Soft edges. A document that had spent 4 years in a cookie tin under a picture of a harbor. On the right is the pricing basis Halvern carried into that bid. 155 adjusted for escalation. The room temperature did not change. Nothing dramatic happened. Stephen simply put his face in his hands and stayed that way. That's a difference of $63 million. Beckhurst was staring at the screen. And here's the thing. I wasn't calculating. He wasn't spinning. Sloan was watching his face very carefully because she'd been rehearsing this moment for 11 weeks, and what she saw on it was not a man being caught. It was a man reading. "I want to be fair to you," she said. "For 3 weeks I assumed this was you. It's your signature on the submission. It's your project. Your name is on the building." Click. A wire diagram. 6 transfers. $63 million left your company in 6 payments over 7 months. Everyone coded as Site Remediation Overrun. Everyone approved under a delegated authority that lets a designated officer clear remediation items without a counter-signature. A control your own board waived in March at the request of the officer who benefits from it. She looked up. The receiving entity is Kestrel Bay Partners. Beckhurst said, "I've never heard of it." "I believe you." Click. Kestrel Bay Partners is registered to Dane Whitlock. The room did nothing. That's what Sloane remembered afterward. Nobody gasped. Nobody stood. 7 board members looked at a screen, and 1 CFO breathed out through his hands, and the air conditioning kept doing what air conditioning does. Roland Beckhurst turned his head, slowly, like his neck was rusted, and he looked at his son-in-law. Dane was already halfway out of his chair. "That's Roland. That's a shell we set up for the parcel assembly. You signed the—" "Sit down. You signed the formation docs, you—" "Sit down." Dane sat down. And Roland Beckhurst, 55 years old, who had put 11 towers on that skyline, stood at the end of a black table with his hands flat on it, and did arithmetic in his head that nobody could see. 7 months. Which was the same 7 months his daughter had been saying, "Dad, Dane's stressed, Dad, don't push him." Which was the same 7 months he'd stopped reading remediation line items, because there were 400 of them, and he had a man for that. He had a man for that. He'd said that sentence out loud maybe 40 times in bars and on golf courses with pride in it. I've got a man for that. Family. You want somebody in the seat who can't walk away. And he had been so busy being enormous that his own house had been carried out the back door in pieces for 7 months, and he had signed for it. Something went out of his face. And then it came back as rage, because that's the only door a man like that has ever installed. "You." He came around the table. Peters half rose and thought better of it. "You think this is clever?" His voice climbed. "Playing dress-up in your own building. Hiding in a kitchen like a rat listening to gossip, Mr. Beckhurst. You inherited this. 10 feet away. 5. You've never built anything. You've never made a payroll at 2 in the morning with nothing in the account. You were given every single thing you have." He was in front of her now, shouting down at her from a foot of height. "You sat there and took it. You know why, because that's what you are. An apron. A pair of hands." And then hoarse because he had nothing left in the chamber but the one round, "You are nothing." The word landed on that black table and died there. Sloane Redfern did not stand up. She didn't raise her voice. She let it be quiet for 3 full seconds, and 3 seconds in a room. Like that is an extremely long time, and everybody in it heard exactly how small the word had sounded. Then she tilted her head. The same tilt. The exact one from a restaurant 11 weeks and 100 years ago. "Mr. Beckhurst," she said, "if I'm nothing," she let it come, "then why do you work for me?" Something in his chest went out like a pilot light. His mouth opened. A sound came out, half breath, half something else. And every bit of height went out of him at once, the way it does, the way it always does. And he was suddenly and completely just a tired 55-year-old man in a very good suit standing in somebody else's room. He reached back for his chair. It wasn't there. He'd knocked it over. Sloane looked at him for one more second. Then she turned away. And that was worse than anything she could have said, because it meant he was finished as a subject. "Ms. Kowal." Trina jumped. "Would you like to speak?" And Trina Kowal walked the length of that 100-foot table in her pressed suit, holding her folder. Past 7 board members and a broken man, and she stopped, and she put the folder down on the black glass. Plain manila on obsidian. It looked like a paper plate at a state dinner. She looked at Beckhurst. "You don't remember me?" He didn't answer. "I worked a fundraiser 2 years ago. I handed you a glass, and you told my supervisor my hands were clammy." A beat. I got written up. Nothing from him. "We're not blight, Mr. Beckhurst. We're not eggs." Her voice was shaking, and she used it anyway. "We're school aides and nurses and waitresses. We're the people who make a city worth building in." She opened the folder. "This is a counter-proposal. We're not asking you to stop." She turned a page around so the board could see it. Community Land Trust. The residents hold the ground under Corbin Row permanently through a non-profit. You keep development rights on parcels 4 and 5. You build your tower. It's smaller 31 floors instead of 48. The historic frontage on Corbin gets rehabbed instead of leveled, which qualifies for preservation credits your team didn't model. She looked up. Your own numbers run honestly come out lower over 5 years and higher over 20. Because nobody has to be relocated. Because relocation is the most expensive line in your budget, and you priced it at $11,002 because you assumed we'd take it. Silence. Then the man in the hooded sweatshirt leaned forward and said, "Where'd you get the preservation credit model?" "From a woman named Persis Vaughn, who's been doing housing court for 29 years, Trina said. "For free. In an office with a window that doesn't open." Sloane Redfern sat back in her chair and let herself feel for about 4 seconds something almost like joy. Because this was the whole point. This was the thing her father had been trying to hand her with a torn half-sheet of paper and a year of her life. Power isn't the wrecking ball. Power is who gets to be in the room when somebody decides where to swing it. "I'm calling the vote," she said. And she did. Motion 1 to reject Halcyon Yards as submitted. Unanimous. Motion 2 to adopt the Corbin Row proposal as the framework and to seat a resident oversight board with a paid chair. Trina Kowal made a small sound and pressed both hands flat against her mouth. Unanimous. Motion 3. Sloane's eyes went to the end of the table. To remove Roland Beckhurst as chief executive of Beckhurst Group effective immediately, and to authorize a full forensic referral to federal prosecutors regarding $63 million in transfers to Kestrel Bay Partners. She paused, with a note in the minutes that the chair does not currently believe Mr. Beckhurst to be the beneficiary of those transfers. Rook's eyebrow moved a 1/4 inch. Nothing else on him did. All in favor? Unanimous. The doors opened. 2 men in quiet suits came in and stood one on either side and did not touch him. "Mr. Beckhurst, this way, sir." He had to bend down and pick up his own briefcase off the floor. He got to the door and turned around because they always turn around. He wanted her to look at him. Anything. Contempt would have been fine. But Sloane Redfern was leaning toward Trina Kowal with a pen in her hand, saying something about architects, and the 2 of them were bent over a manila folder on a 100-foot table. He was already gone from the room. The doors closed. 9 floors down in a hallway with a phone against his ear, Jane Whitlock was already talking. "How fast can you file it?" A pause. "No, listen to me. Listen. She was undercover 7 months. There's a condition in that will, and she just broke it, in front of a room with a camera in it. My camera, my shooter, my guest list, 11 outside bodies, who all heard her say her own name. He was walking fast. And I've got a witness who can put her in an apron. He hit the elevator button with the side of his fist. She's not the chair, he said. As of about 9 minutes ago, she's a 28-year-old woman with no job. The petition landed at 4:11 that same afternoon. Sloane was still in the boardroom. That's the detail she'd remember. The chairs hadn't been pushed in. There were coffee cups leaving rings on the black glass. Trina had gone home 2 hours ago to tell her son the building was staying up. And Edmund Rook came in with a phone in his hand and did not sit down. They've filed. Who has? Whitlock. He set the phone on the table. Through counsel addressed to the trustees, requesting an immediate fitness determination. Sloane looked at it. On what grounds? That you disclosed your identity before the completion of the year. I disclosed it in a board meeting, to my own board. You disclosed it, Edmund said, in a meeting with 11 non-Ardennes attendees, filmed by a camera operator. He added to the manifest in front of guests. He spent a week fighting to get seated. He rubbed his eyes. Sloane. He built the room, and he isn't wrong about what happened in it. She sat down slowly. How long do I have? The trustees convene Monday, 9 a.m., which was 3 days. Edmund. Yes. If they take it. What happens to Corbin Rowe? He didn't answer right away. Which was the answer? The vote you took this morning is a board resolution, he said carefully. A new board can revisit a resolution. So they'd build it. They'd build it responsibly. Better relocation, proper environmental, no fraud. He met her eyes. And they'd build it. Because $63 million in recoverable value sitting under 900 tenants is not a thing. 7 fiduciaries leave in the ground, and every one of them would sleep perfectly well. Sloane put both hands flat on the table. Because here, it was finally in words. She could keep the company, or she could keep the block. Not both. She went home to the $400 room. Not the apartment with the decorative stones. The one on Corbin with the hot plate, and the window facing a wall, which she'd told herself she kept for cover. That was a lie. She'd known it was a lie for weeks. She sat on the floor with her back against the bed. And here's what went through her head in order, and it isn't dignified. First, I could fight it. Because she had the best firms in the country on retainer, and a document that was arguably unenforceable, and 12 months of litigation would freeze everything, including the trustees, including any new development, including, except no. Because 12 months of litigation freezes Corbin Rowe, too. Nothing gets built, and nothing gets protected, and every tenant in that footprint sits in limbo for a year, with a demolition notice in a drawer, and Odessa Pratt is 84. Odessa Pratt is 84. Second, I could go to Ruth Ann. Tell her everything. Have somebody to what? To sit with. To make it hurt less. She actually caught herself doing that. Reaching for a woman in a bathrobe on Cheswick Terrace, so somebody would put a hand on her arm. And she stopped hard, and thought, oh. You do not go to a 66-year-old woman whose home you might be about to lose, and ask her to comfort you about it. Which is when she understood what her father had actually been teaching her for 7 months. Not humility. Everybody says humility. She'd assumed humility. He'd been teaching her what it costs. Because you can learn to see people. That part's easy. That part takes about a month with a good trainer and a bad shift. The expensive part comes later when seeing them means giving up something you actually want. And what she wanted was in a drawer on the 9th floor. A sealed envelope with a date on it in blue ink in that handwriting. The last thing her father would ever say to her, and the only way to get it was to finish the year. If she signed what she was about to sign, she was never going to read it. She sat on that floor until 3 in the morning. Then she called Edmund and said, "Wake up Persis Vaughn." They worked all day Saturday and all day Sunday in an office with the blinds down. Because there was one thing she could still do, and the window on it closed at 9 o'clock Monday morning. She was still chair. Until the trustees ruled, she held the authority absolutely. Every signature valid. Every transfer executed. So she conveyed it. All 5 parcels. The ground under Corbin Row into the Corbin Row community. Land trust in perpetuity with development rights on parcels 4 and 5, reserved for a build that would have to be negotiated with a resident board that could not be dissolved. Persis read the conveyance 3 times. "You understand what you're doing?" "Yes." "No, I need you to say it out loud, because in about 9 hours, somebody's going to ask me if you were of sound mind." Persis put the pen down. "This ground is worth $63 million, and you're handing it to a non-profit with $400 in a checking account. Will it hold?" "They'll sue." "Of course they'll sue. They'd be negligent not to." Persis tapped the page. "But a trust conveyance isn't a resolution somebody reverses at a meeting. To take this back, they have to go to a judge and prove the transfer itself was improper, and that takes years, and that's the entire reason this instrument exists. People built it because they'd watched every promise ever made to a neighborhood evaporate the second the person who made it left the room." She looked up. "So, Monday morning 7 trustees are going to look at this, and it is going to be by a wide margin the single best argument anybody could make that you are unfit to run a holding company." Sloane looked at the papers. "Yes," she said, "it is." And she signed. Sunday night, Cheswick Terrace. Ruth Ann made tea because Ruth Ann made tea, and they sat in the front room under 19 years of photographs. Sloane told her. All of it. The name, the will. The year, the restaurant. The 15-year-old dishwasher named Desmond Redfern, who slept in the dry storage room, and the tin box and the conveyance, and Monday at 9. Ruth Ann didn't interrupt once. When it was over, she sat with her hands around a cup she hadn't touched. "I knew you weren't right," she said. "I want that on the record. You said that in an alley. I've been saying it since your 2nd week." She set the cup down. "Nobody folds napkins like that. You folded them like somebody trying very hard to be good at something for the first time in her life. Girls who need the job don't fold like that. They fold fast." Sloane laughed. It came out wrong and turned into something else halfway. And Ruth Ann Odell looked at the window for a while. Then she said, "I have to tell you something, and I'm going to do a bad job of it." "Okay. 30 years ago, there was a boy at the Larkspur." Sloane went still. "Not your father. Long after him." She was picking at the arm of the chair. "I was 36. I'd been on the floor 6 months. Prep kid 16, maybe 17. Quiet one. And there was money missing out of the office 3 weeks running, and they decided it was him." "Was it?" "No. Flat. Immediate. It was the night manager. I knew it was the night manager because I'd seen him at the safe on a Tuesday. And there is no reason on God's earth for anybody to be at that safe on a Tuesday." She stopped. "And I was 36 years old with a husband on unemployment, and I'd been at that job 6 months. The room was very quiet, so I didn't say anything. Sloane didn't move. They walked him out the back. He was crying. He kept saying it wasn't him over and over, and he had a paper hat still in his hand, and I stood at the pass with a plate in each hand, and I watched. Ruth Ann's voice didn't crack. That was somehow worse. And I never learned his name. 30 years. I couldn't look him up if I wanted to. She finally looked at Sloane. So don't you tell me you don't know what it costs to speak in a room where everybody else is quiet. I know exactly what it costs. I've been carrying the receipt for 30 years. Sloane said, Ruth Ann, I'm not finished. She stood up. 66 years old, in a cardigan, in a room with a dead man's flannel still on the bedroom door. You stood up in that church basement, for Odessa, with a camera running and everything to lose, and you didn't know it would work. She picked up the cold tea and took it to the sink. That's the whole thing, honey. That's the only thing. Whatever they do to you, a Monday morning, you did the one thing I didn't do, and I have been waiting 30 years to watch somebody do it. Monday, 8:40 a.m. Sloane Redfern did not go to the trustees' offices. She went to the 80th floor of Beckhurst Tower. The security desk didn't know what to do with her. Her name wasn't on anything anymore. In the end, a woman escorted her up because nobody wanted to be the one who said no. The office was mostly empty. They'd already taken the art. 2 men from a moving company were rolling a cabinet onto a dolly, and Roland Beckhurst was standing at a window in a sweater. She'd never seen him in a sweater. He turned around. Come to watch. No, because you're welcome to. There's a chair. He gestured. There wasn't a chair. He noticed. There was a chair. She stood. And here's the thing about what she did next, which she'd thought about for 2 hours on the subway, with a folder in her lap and nothing in the folder that could threaten him. She had no leverage. None. She'd signed the ground away Saturday. She'd be out of the company by 10. She could not offer him a settlement, a job, a lawyer, a phone call. She had at that moment less institutional power than the woman at the security desk. So she couldn't trade. Which meant she had exactly one thing left, and it's the cheapest thing in the world, and almost nobody ever spends it. She asked him a question. When did you stop reading the remediation line? He blinked. What? There are 400 line items a quarter. You used to read all of them. Everyone I talked to says the same thing, that you were the one who caught the errors, that you were famous for it. She kept her voice completely level. When did you stop? Roland Beckhurst opened his mouth, and then he didn't say anything for a long moment, and something happened in his face that she had not planned for and could not have. March, he said, of last year. My daughter had the baby in February. He looked back out the window. And Dane came to me in March and said, Roland, you're going to be a grandfather. Let me carry some of it. Let me carry the small stuff. He laughed. 1 syllable. Nothing in it. And I was so pleased. And then Sloane Redfern did the only thing she'd come to do. She shut up. She stood in a stripped office and let a 55-year-old man talk, and she did not fill the pauses. And she did not agree or disagree, and after about 90 seconds, he sat down on a packing crate because his legs wanted him to. He talked for 11 minutes. Nobody had let him talk for 11 minutes in about 20 years. That's not sentimental. It's just what happens to men who get very large. Everyone in the room is waiting for the sentence to end so they can execute it. Nobody is listening. Listening is a thing you do to people. You need something from. And he'd spent 2 decades making sure he needed nothing from anybody. And somewhere in minute 9, he said it. Not as a confession. He said it the way you say a thing you've been chewing on alone. He knew about the will. Sloane's chest did something. Say that again. Dane, he knew about your condition. The year. Beckhurst was looking at the floor. 3 weeks before that meeting, he asked me if I'd ever met the chair of Ardennes face to face. Twice he asked. And I said no, nobody has. That's their whole shtick. And he said, he stopped. He said that's about to change. 3 weeks before. Give or take. And then he spent every day of those 3 weeks on the guest list. Beckhurst looked up. I thought he'd lost his mind. Fighting Rook's office over seats. Adding a camera crew to a board meeting. I told him nobody films a board meeting. And what did he say? He said we want a record. Sloane stood very still. Mr. Beckhurst, how did he know I was undercover 3 weeks before I told anyone? And she watched a man who had been the smartest person in every room for 30 years arrive. Finally, all the way at the bottom of it. He had somebody in your lawyer's office, he said. He told me it was scheduling. 91 minutes later, Persis Vaughn stood in front of 7 trustees and said one sentence that ended it. A man cannot build the breach and then collect on it. That was the whole argument. Everything else was paperwork. Because Dane Whitlock had paid for a clause out of a private trust instrument, and then spent 3 weeks stacking a room with cameras and outside witnesses for the express purpose of triggering it. And you can dress that up in a great many pages, and Persis did, but a room of fiduciaries only needed the one sentence, because every one of them could see the liability from where they were sitting. The petition was dismissed at 11:52. The trustees did not restore her. That's important. They didn't have to, and they didn't. What they ruled was that the condition had not been validly triggered, which meant the year was still running, which meant Sloane Redfern was still chair, and still had 4 months and 11 days to go, and had on Saturday given away $63 million of ground. They noted the conveyance. They asked her about it. She said she'd do it again. 3 months later, 6:15 in the morning, and the sun wasn't over the buildings across the street yet, and the prep lights were on in the kitchen of the Larkspur room. Harlan Pike was gone. He'd resigned in November, 3 days after somebody checked the August case numbers against the invoices. I was managing a steakhouse 2 towns over now, and was by every account much better at it, which happens more often than people think. Ruth Ann Odell was on the floor with a 19-year-old named Priya, who'd been on for 4 days, and was gripping. No, wrong. She caught the girl's wrist mid-air. You're gripping. You grip, you'll drop it by 9. Sorry. Don't be sorry, be flat. Your forearm's a shelf. The shelf. Use the shelf. At the service door at 6:20, Edmund Rook was standing in an overcoat with his hat in his hand, looking deeply out of place, holding an envelope. Blue ink. That handwriting. 41 days, he said. I could keep it another 41 days. Or you could take it now, and I'd never tell a soul, and there is nobody left alive who would know the difference. Sloane looked at it for a long moment. Then she took it, and folded it once, and put it in the front pocket of her apron. 41 days, she said. And Edmund Rook, 68 years old, put his hat on, and went back out into the cold, smiling in a way he'd have denied under oath. At 10:40, the door opened, and Odessa Pratt came in with her coat over her arm, and sat at the two-top by the second window, same as she had for the last 46 years. A number that was going to keep going up now. Black tea. Milk on the side. 1 shortbread. It was on the table before she got her coat off. She didn't say thank you. And the woman who set it down went back to the station with the envelope in her apron pocket and picked up a stack of napkins and started folding. Slow. The way somebody folds who is trying very hard to be good at something. This story is a work of fiction. All characters' names, businesses, places, events, and incidents are products of the imagination or used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons living or dead, or actual events is entirely coincidental.